What's up, guys? Check out this shirt. This is a Burning Crusade shirt. Gonna have to be changing this to Wrath of the Lich King soon. Well, guys, today I am super excited to present this fully flushed out Death Knight class deep dive guide, which goes into everything Death Knight related for Wrath of the Lich King. Whether you're wondering what is the best race for Death Knight, or the best in slot items, or even the talent progression, the rotation, whatever, it is all in this mega guide. I hope you enjoy it. Let me know why you like playing Death Knight in Wrath of the Lich King. For me, it's because the class fantasy of being an unholy necromancer, fallen paladin, warrior of death. I just love it. Enjoy. Death Knights are easily one of the most fun classes to play because you embody an evil, unholy warrior of death who can summon the dead, spread pestilence and disease, cast debilitating spells, and also be a plate-wearing juggernaut who can cleave down multiple enemies at melee range. Death Knights are a powerful new type of class, a hero class, starting at level 55 and possessing the ability to deal not only physical damage, but also shadow and frost. Not only that, but they have self-enhancing spells like Horn of Winter, Anti-Magic Shield, and many more that make them a terror to spellcasters and plate-wearing classes alike. Not only is the class fun to play, but they are deathly powerful in both PvE and PvP, with the ability to be a top-tier tank as blood specialization, which mainly focuses on increasing their survivability through lots and lots of self-healing talents, as well as damage mitigation talents. Now, the Unholy tree focuses more on improving your diseases and summons, allowing you to permanently control an undead ghoul, improve your army of the dead, and even summon an undead gargoyle to rain terror from above. Frost specialization, on the other hand, introduces dual-wielding talents, the ability to hold two one-handers and do very well with that, and powerful damage-dealing talents like Howling Blast, which is an incredible AoE ability. In PvP, there are plenty of strong arena teams Death Knights can join. 3v3 teams like TSG, which is Paladin Warrior Death Knight, have been known to steamroll other teams, especially when both Warrior and Death Knight have Bringe Roll, the overpowered lifesteal two-handed axe that on equip grants instant gladiator. Death Knights also have very powerful effects to bring to PvE. Debuffs such as Ebon Plague, which grants 13% increased magic damage taken to afflicted targets, and powerful raid-wide buffs like improved Icy Talons, which grants 20% increased melee haste. Death Knights also can equip the new legendary in Wrath of the Lich King called Shadowmourne. That's right, the relative of Frostmourne, the Lich King's blade. One unique trait about Death Knights is that when you are done doing your starting series of quests, you'll get a full set of rares, which looks amazing. And the gear is so good that once you head to Outland and start leveling, it doesn't get replaced for some time, so it's quite good. When it comes to using abilities, Death Knights operate off of two resource systems. Runic Power, which is like Rage, generated through attacks and slowly decaying outside of combat, and it is used for abilities like Frost Strike, Summon Gargoyle, or Death Coil. Now, the other resource is 6 runes. 2 blood runes, 2 unholy runes, and 2 frost runes. After using a rune, they go on cooldown and will come back automatically after some time. Now, abilities can sometimes require multiple runes to be used, so knowing which abilities to use when can be important so that you aren't stuck not able to use the abilities you want. There are many abilities that grant you flexibility with your runes, like Blood Tap, which converts a blood rune into a death rune. Now, these death runes can be used as blood, frost, or unholy runes. Lots of flexibility there. Throughout each of the 3 talent trees, there are also talents, which cause your runes to convert to death runes. Talents like Reaping in the Unholy tree, which causes your Blood Strike and Pestilence to convert the blood rune used to cast that ability into a death rune when it's done refreshing. Or Blood of the North, which does the exact same thing, but is found in the Frost tree. The Blood tree one is actually a little different though, and it's called Death Rune Mastery, which causes Death Strike or Obliterate to cause your next Frost and Unholy runes to become Death runes when they refresh. These talents can all be very helpful in making your playstyle a little bit more flexible. Now, speaking of playstyle, Death Knights are actually very similar to Warlocks in that they have damage over times that they want to keep up on their target at all times. But instead of curses or magic effects, these dots are diseases and are even more important, arguably, than Warlock dots because they empower the Death Knight strikes greatly. For example, Scourge Strike will do an additional 12% of the physical damage done from the attack as additional shadow damage for each of your diseases on your target. Now, Death Knights have a total of 3 diseases: Blood Plague, Frost Fever, and if you're unholy, Crypt Fever, which morphs into Ebon Plague if you spec into it. Now, this means an extra 36% extra damage as shadow damage from your Scourge Strike if all 3 of your diseases are on your target. Now, many Death Knights will tell you it's not even worth using your strikes if your target doesn't have diseases on. So keep that in mind when it comes to playstyle, that you'll have to always keep an eye on those diseases if you want to be effective. But there are many abilities that help manage diseases, like Pestilence, which spreads your diseases to all nearby targets. You can even get Glyph of Disease, which causes your Pestilence ability to refresh the duration of your diseases to their maximum duration on your target, which essentially frees up both an Unholy rune and a Frost rune in your rotation. Now, the diseases themselves are actually really interesting and are more than just to make your strikes stronger. Frost Fever, for example, is a frost damage over time disease, as well as a damage mitigation debuff in the form of reducing the target's melee and ranged attack speed. This disease is caused by Icy Touch, which is an incredibly powerful ranged ability causing instant frost damage and is a huge threat generator for Death Knight tanks when used in Frost Presence. Blood Plague, on the other hand, is just a shadow damage over time disease, so on the surface, it might just look like one to make your strike stronger. But with the tier 9 4-piece bonus, Blood Plague can crit, which paired with Pestilence and Wandering Plague, which gives a chance for your diseases to deal 100% additional damage to all enemies within 8 yards, this seemingly simple dot can cause an absurd amount of damage. And the last disease, Crypt Fever, which is caused by your other diseases, increases the disease damage taken by the target by 30%, and when morphed into Ebon Plague, increases magic damage taken by the target by 13%. Now, when playing Unholy, it's important to always leave a Blood Rune or Blood Tap ready to use for Pestilence to refresh your diseases with that Glyph of Disease. You don't want to have to waste a Frost Rune and an Unholy Rune to refresh Blood Plague and Frost Fever when it can be done with one Blood Rune. This is just one example of smart rune management as a Death Knight. Death Knights also have a nice convenience spell called Deathgate, which brings them back to Ebon Hold, which is kind of the Death Knight area similar to Moonglade, on a 1-minute cooldown. This spell can act like another Hearthstone, getting you back to town, very similar to the Druid's Teleport Moonglade spell. Death Knights are also somewhat similar to Warriors with their presences. There's Blood Presence, Frost Presence, and Unholy Presence. Each one has their uses depending on the situation. Frost Presence is the tanking presence, granting increased threat generation, increased stamina, and armor contribution, and even a straight-up reduced damage taken. Blood Presence grants straight 15% increased damage and a 4% heal on all damage the Death Knight deals, clearly a DPS presence. And last, Unholy Presence grants 15% increased attack and move speed, and reduces the global cooldown by half a second, which is pretty nice for spamming abilities. As you can guess, Unholy is also a DPS presence. But don't be fooled. Even if Frost Presence is the tanking presence, the specialization for tanking is actually Blood, assuming the patch of Classic Wrath of the Lich King will be patch 3.3.5. Now, if you remember way back in the day when Wrath was first released, Blood was completely broken. It was the damage dealing specialization that all Death Knights went, and in patch 3.3.5, after many beatings from the good old nerf bat, it can still be a damage spec, but it's not as good as it used to be, and it is almost always used by serious tanks. Now, when it comes to what is the best race for Death Knight, this decision can make your blood boil. This question is frequently asked because, unlike other classes, Any race can be a Death Knight in Wrath of the Lich King, so you can feel as though maybe you have chains of ice paralyzing you from making a choice. Orcs for the Horde are a great choice for PvE. They've got 5 expertise with axes. Blood Fury doesn't give you a healing debuff anymore and will now grant both attack power and spell damage. Command has been revamped to now work for all pets. All pets means your ghoul, all your army of the dead minions, as well as your gargoyle, which is very powerful. If you're thinking about PvP for the Horde, the Blood Elf Silence Interrupt can be a game changer. It's definitely a close race considering Will of the Forsaken for Undead. Troll Berserking is actually buffed, as well as a new racial called the Voodoo Shuffle, which reduces movement slows duration by 15%. Overall, though, I think Blood Elf is probably the best, where an interrupt can win you the duel, the arena, the battleground, and so on. Now for the Alliance, Draenei I think are an incredible choice for PvE. The 1% spell and melee hit is now combined into a single racial that all Draenei get. It's going to be just for your party, so you're going to want at least 5 Draenei for your raid, so it's going to be very sought after and useful. Human sword and mace specialization has actually been nerfed in Wrath of the Lich King. Dwarves now have mace specialization, so you could consider them as well. But when it comes to PvP, humans are hands down the best PvP race in Wrath of the Lich King, regardless of what class you're interested in, because of a new racial talent or racial ability called Every Man for Himself. This has been added, granting a baseline free PvP trinket for all humans. What this does essentially is it frees up both trinket slots for better options, so all serious PvPers will likely go human due to how broken Every Man for Himself is. While on the topic for PvP, Death Knights are certainly one of the best classes for peeling, basically peeling an enemy off their target. With Death Grip, Death Knights can force an enemy to where they are currently standing, which, if you're a PvP player, you know how powerful that can be, especially against a melee damage dealer. The Dalaran Sewers, the new arena, lends itself to this type of playstyle with upper and lower platforms, and even Blade's Edge Arena has this same bridge and ground level setup. Death Grip can also be used as an additional interrupt, which is very useful when trying to get a kill or stop a powerful spell from being cast. The Death Knight Ghoul also has Gnaw, which is a melee range 3-second stun. Ghouls also have Leap, so they can basically charge over to their target very quickly. This can be extremely powerful too, allowing the ghoul to leap and then gnaw, interrupting a critical heal. Strangulate is also a baseline ability for all Death Knights, which is a 5-second silence on a 2-minute cooldown. Follow this up by commanding your ghoul to explode for massive AoE shadow damage, and Death Knights have all the tools in their kit to be a competitive PvPer. Now, it doesn't just end with stuns and silences though. Death Knights have one of the most notorious PvP snare abilities in the game, Desecration, a huge 50% move speed slow in an AoE lasting 20 seconds every time the Death Knight uses Plague Strike. This snare alone enables Death Knights to constantly sit on their target, unable for their enemies to get away. And if they somehow do, Death Grip is an incredible gap closer. Now, when it comes to defensive cooldowns, Death Knights are armed to the teeth. Anti-Magic Shell absorbs 75% of spell damage, up to 50% of the Death Knight's health, prevents the application of harmful magic effects like Polymorph, and gives the Death Knight runic power from the damage they would have taken for 5 seconds from spells. This is just another powerful PvP ability that will surely cause spellcasters to break their keyboards with rage. Death Knights also have an ability called Icebound Fortitude. This ability is another reason why Death Knights were so broken on release. It had a very short cooldown, and it also just so happens to make them immune to stuns, in addition to granting a nearly 50% damage reduction for 12 seconds. This powerful defensive cooldown now has a 2-minute cooldown as of patch 3.3.5, which is much more fair considering how powerful it is. Now, if you spec Frost, you can use Unbreakable Armor. This grants you 25% increased armor and 20% increased strength, which is a powerful offensive cooldown in addition to defensive for Frost DPS, and And of course, that 25% armor does not hurt when you're taking physical damage. Now, another really great PvP talent found in the Frost talent tree is Lichborn. This turns you into an undead, making you immune to charm, fear, and sleep for 10 seconds. It's basically like a talentable Will of the Forsaken that doesn't remove the effect, just grants you immunity. However, paladins can use Turn Undead on you, which will make you run around in fear, and priests can use Shackle Undead on you, basically stunning you in place, since you are undead technically. So having a handy macro to take it off when you need can be pretty important in PvP. Now, Frost Death Knights are different from the other specializations because they can dual wield quite effectively with two one-handers. Talents like Nerves of Cold Steel increases your hit chance by 3%, and offhand damage, which is a must. Thread of Thessarian causes your strikes like Obliterate to also deal damage with your offhand weapon. This is huge. These talents are what make Frost DPS really start to pump, in addition to must-have talents like Annihilation, which makes Obliterate no longer consume your diseases on the target, and the notorious Killing Machine talent, which gives your melee attacks a chance to make your next Icy Touch, Howling Blast, or Frost Strike a guaranteed critical strike. Frost has a lot of good talents, which make it a top-tier build, right alongside Unholy. Now, the Blood talent tree also has some really fun abilities with Hysteria, increasing physical damage by 20%, but losing 1% of max health per second. Reminds me a lot of Unholy Frenzy from Warcraft 3. There's also Dancing Rune Weapon, which is iconic for the Blood tree. You summon a second Dancing Rune Weapon that does the same attacks as the Death Knight, but at 50% reduced damage. Overall, each specialization is incredibly powerful for different reasons. You can bet a lot of people will want to create a Death Knight Wrath of the Lich King, but because of their unique resources of runic power and runes, along with disease management, they aren't the easiest class to play correctly. So if you're a pro at Death Knight, you'll definitely stand out. Now, changing gears, we're going to talk a little bit about leveling your new, fresh Death Knight. Now, we're going to talk about gear to get while leveling, and Death Knights are unique in that doing your starting series of quests gets you a full set of rares that frankly look amazing. So when you head to Outland to start leveling, your gear is pretty decent and doesn't actually get replaced immediately. Even Hellreaver, the great two-handed polearm from Ramparts, is only slightly an upgrade from your Great Sword or Great Axe of the Ebon Blade that you get from the starting series of quests. If you can find a group while you're leveling, doing the Ring of Blood will be well worth it. You get lots of experience, as well as you get the Honed Void Axe, which is a nice upgrade in raw damage, and you also get 30 agility, especially if you're Orc. The 5 expertise can be nice. At level 68, you can head to Northrend, where the new continent awaits. And when it comes to getting good gear, a lot of it honestly will come from dungeons and then heroics and then raids. But while you're leveling, a good weapon is something worth going out of your way for. So we are going to talk about Northrend weapon progression, starting with two-handed axes. So when you first land on Outland, the first item you should probably seek out is the Axe of Frozen Death. This is a level 68 quest reward in Borean Tundra called Last Rites if you're Alliance, or Hellscream's Champion if you're Horde. Now, obviously, this definitely sort of shows my bias for starting in Borean Tundra versus on the east side of Northrend and the Howling Fjord, but that's up to you. I think the Axe of Frozen Death is a great starter weapon. The next weapon you could potentially get that's also an axe is Captain Carver's Persuader. This is a level 73 world drop BOE, so good luck finding it, but if you want to go to the auction house and purchase one, chances are you'll probably be able to find it. And then after that, we're going to talk about the Honed Cobalt Cleaver. This is also a level 73 BOE blue. However, this is made from blacksmiths, and it's really not that hard to make. It just requires 4 Saronite bars, 12 Cobalt bars, and 2 crystallized fire, so you could probably find that. And then at level 75, there's the De-Raged War Axe. This is a quest reward from the Amphitheater of Anguish. So just like Ring of Blood, Northrend has the Amphitheater of Anguish, lots of experience, and you get that nice good item at the end. At level 78, there's the Wormclaw Battle Axe from the Cache of Aragos in the Oculus. And then from that point, there's a lot of level 80 options. You could potentially get the Edge of Oblivion, which is level 80 from Jadoga Shadowseeker, a boss in An-Kahet, the Old Kingdom. There's the Colossal Skullclad Cleaver, a level 80 purple from Loken in the Halls of Lightning. And those are all different axes. I did forget to mention Ingvar's Monolithic Cleaver. This is actually a level 70 axe, which drops from Ingvar the Plunderer in Utgard Keep. So there's also that option too. Moving on to two-handed maces, which Death Knights can use in Wrath of the Lich King, we have the Petrified Ironwood Smasher. This is a level 76 BOE blue world drop. Again, probably you're not going to find it, but maybe on the auction house you might. Saronite Mind Crusher. This is actually a BOP blacksmithing weapon, so chances are you're not going to get this unless you already have all of the materials from an alt to level up blacksmithing on your Death Knight very quickly. It requires 20 Saronite bars and 2 crystallized fire, so not very hard to make. There's Durkee's Superstructure. This is actually a level 80 mace that drops off a rare elite in the Storm Peaks, so once you get max level you could go for it. There's also the Crimson Cranium Crusher, which is a level 75 quest reward from the Amphitheater of Anguish if you're going for those two-handed maces. Moving on to two-handed swords, the Troll Butcherer is a level 74 item that drops from Trollgore in Draktheron Keep. There is Dreadlord's Blade, which is a level 78 item in the Culling of Stratholm. There's also the Sword of Justice, which everyone always calls the Tuning Fork, if you remember. That's from the Halls of Stone. It's a level 80 item. And there's also the Rune Blade of Demonstrable Power at level 80. Requires Revered with the Knights of Ebon Blade, but can be bought from Duchess Minx. Moving on to polearms, our last item, we have Banner Slicer, a level 75 world drop BOE, so check the auction house. There's also the Icier Barbed Spear, which is a level 75 quest item from the Amphitheater of Anguish, and the Whale Stick Harpoon, a level 78 item which requires Revered with the Kaluak, sold by either Kaluak Quartermaster in Dragonblight or the Howling Fjord. There is also the Saliva Corroded Pike, which is a level 80 item from Morag in the Violet Hold. And those are basically a lot of the entry-level / you just hit level 80 items that you can go for in Northrend. Now, next I want to talk about Glyphs for Death Knights. So Glyphs are a new feature in Wrath of the Lich King which allow you to augment your spells and abilities with 3 major and 3 minor glyphs. These are slowly unlocked as you level, and at level 80 you'll have access to all 6. The best glyphs for you are going to depend on what specialization you are, regardless if you're still leveling or if you're looking for endgame best in slot glyphs. For that reason, we're going to go more in depth on glyphs when we get into each specialization section, which we're actually going to do right now. And Unholy is up first. If you're not interested in Unholy, feel free to skip around. Now, the best glyphs for Unholy, for major, we have the Glyph of Dark Death. This is going to increase the damage or healing done by Death Coil by 15%. Very nice. There's the Glyph of Disease. This is very important. This causes your Pestilence ability to now refresh disease durations and secondary effects of diseases on your primary target back to their maximum duration. So this is very important because your 2 diseases that you want on every target are both Frost Fever and Blood Plague. These are going to make all of your abilities do more damage, not all of them, but mainly the strikes like Blood Strike and Plague Strike, Death Strike. And in order to get those diseases on, you have to cast Icy Touch for Frost Fever, and you have to cast Plague Strike for Blood Plague. And so being able to use just 1 rune, a Blood rune, to cast Pestilence is much better than having to use 2 runes, a Frost rune and an Unholy rune, in order to refresh your diseases. So the Glyph of Disease is very, very good. Moving on to the Glyph of Icy Touch. Your Frost Fever deals 20% additional damage. This is very strong. Obviously, it just is amazing. You're doing 20% more damage with one of your dots. When it comes to minor glyphs, you're typically going to see things that are just small quality of life improvements, but there is one that actually does make a bit of a difference, and that one is the Glyph of Blood Tap. Your Blood Tap no longer causes damage to you. This is pretty nice because Blood Tap takes some of your health in order to convert a Blood rune into a Death rune. A Death rune can be used as a Frost rune, a Unholy rune, or a Blood rune, any of the 3. And then we have Glyph of Pestilence, which increases the radius of your pestilence by 5 yards. That's actually another good one. And then we have Glyph of Raised Dead, where your Raised Dead spell no longer requires a reagent. This is a just quality of life change. Obviously, it's not game breaking because carrying around reagents with you isn't really that hard to do. It's just inconvenient. And that's where we're going to switch over to Unholy leveling talent progression. So while you're leveling a Death Knight, you're going to unlock your talents pretty rapidly. So I would say the talents don't matter too much because you're still in the Death Knight starting zone. You're going to unlock a lot of your talents. The order doesn't matter very much, but I'm still going to give you my recommendations for Unholy leveling talent progression. So first up, Vicious Strikes is amazing. It's going to give you increased critical strike chance and increase critical strike damage bonus of your Plague Strike and Scourge Strike. Very, very strong. I love this talent. We have Virulence, which increases your chance to hit with spells by 3% and reduces the chance your dots get removed or cured, which is fine. It's going to be good later if you're going for PvP. Now from this point, I really like Morbidity and I really like Ravenous Dead. Increasing your total strength by 1%, as well as increasing the damage done and healing of Death Coil by 5%, are both very strong. I think Ravenous Dead is stronger. Just overall gaining that bonus strength is great. It's going to improve every single one of your abilities, so I like to get Ravenous Dead, and then I like to get Morbidity, so you can get that increased damage of Death Coil. From there, you can just get Outbreak because it's very strong. It increases the damage of your Plague Strike by 30%, so you want to get this one ASAP. From there, actually Epidemic helps a lot because you don't want to be refreshing your dots too frequently, and this is going to increase the duration of Blood Plague and Frost Fever by 6 seconds, so you can use your runes on more powerful things. Now from this point, I really like Blood Caked Blade. This is very strong. It gives your auto attacks a 30% chance to cause a blood-caked strike, which hits for 25% weapon damage, plus 12.5% for each of your diseases on your target. So this is going to get more value the longer the fight is, but obviously you're going to be doing lots of fighting because you're leveling, so it's very, very strong. From there, you could get Night of the Dead if you're using your ghoul on cooldown if you've learned the spell. I personally think Necrosis is more consistent, so I like to put 5 points into this. Now you might be wondering, why am I not getting on a Pale Horse? Now honestly, this is a favorite of mine. I'm sure you love this talent too, but to be honest, just increasing your mount speed by 20% I feel like is not game-breakingly good. You already have an epic mount. I think a lot of people could make an argument for getting on a Pale Horse. I just don't think it's necessary, but that's just me personally. From here, you could definitely get Impurity. I think Impurity is very, very strong. And of course, you do want to get Night of the Dead, and then you can unlock Master of Ghouls, because once you have your ghoul out permanently, that's going to be a very nice DPS bonus. From there, I would go ahead and get Desolation. Causes you to deal 1% additional damage with all attacks for the next 20 seconds when you use Blood Strike. Now, there are a lot of talents here that are good that I'm skipping over. Unholy Blight is pretty decent, but it's kind of a PvP talent, preventing your diseases from being dispelled. If you are on a PvP server, you might be getting different talents than this. Desecration is another very, very powerful talent, which basically gives you an AoE slow, extremely powerful. But again, this is more of a PvP talent, and we're going strictly for leveling, assuming, you know, honestly, that you can avoid PvP encounters like in a PvE server. Bone Shield is pretty strong. It will fall off a lot because your ghoul does not necessarily have a taunt. Things are going to be on you all the time, but getting that 20% less reduced damage from all sources is very strong, and you're also going to do 2% more damage with all attacks. So it's pretty good. Crypt Fever is actually very nice. You're going to want to get this. Your diseases also cause Crypt Fever, which increases disease damage taken by the target by 30%, so that is super strong. You're going to want to get Scourge Strike. This is basically going to be one of the abilities you use all the time. 70% of weapon damage is physical damage, plus 238, and then you're also going to do an additional 12% of the physical damage done as shadow damage for each of your diseases on your target. So you can see having those diseases is extremely important. Scourge Strike does some serious damage. Now also Ebon Plaguebringer is huge. This one is going to give you that increased magic damage taken on your target by 13%. It's also going to improve your critical strike chance by weapons and spells by 3% at all times. So another really, really strong talent. Now, Wandering Plague is honestly one of the best talents in the Unholy tree when it comes to doing AoE damage. This is a reason why Unholy is the king of AoE damage. No other Death Knight spec comes close. When your diseases damage an enemy, which happens a lot, there is a chance equal to your melee critical strike chance that they will cause 100% additional damage to the target and all enemies within 8 yards. Ignores any target under the effect of a spell that is cancelled by taking damage, so it won't break CC. Wandering Plague is extremely powerful, makes Unholy very, very good at AoE damage. Granted, depending on how you're leveling, maybe if you're doing a lot of single target stuff, then don't get Wandering Plague, but if you're doing dungeons, chances are your group's going to be pulling multiple mobs. This is going to do a lot of damage for you. Rage of Rivendare. Your spells and abilities deal 2% more damage to your targets infected with Blood Plague. Also increases expertise by 1. Love this one. It's very, very strong. 10% more damage. And then Summon Gargoyle. This is extremely powerful. It's a good cooldown to pop when you're in a boss fight, or if you're up against like an elite mob while you're questing, things like that. Now, when it comes to the next talents, I like to move over to Frost. Improved Icy Touch is incredibly powerful. Your Icy Touch does an additional 15% damage, and your Frost Fever reduces melee and ranged attack speed by an additional 6%. This is damage mitigation, which also helps your sustain. Not that Death Knights struggle with sustain by any means. And then we're going to get Runic Power Mastery, which increases your maximum runic power by 30. That's nice, so that you don't have to stress out about getting too much runic power. And then what's nice is Black Ice. This is an extremely powerful talent you can just dump points into. Increases your frost and shadow damage by 10%. Just straightforward, very powerful. And then we have Icy Talons. 5 points in that. You leech heat from victims of your Frost Fever so that when their melee attack speed is reduced, yours increases by 20% for the next 20 seconds. Very, very strong ability. Absolutely love it. And then finally, for our last 2 points, we can put into Endless Winter. Your strength is increased by 4%, and your Mind Freeze no longer cost runic power. That's a very nice quality of life change for interrupting spells. And you also get that 4% strength. And so this is the build that I recommend for PvE DPS as an Unholy Death Knight. You can follow this while you're leveling. You can change points if you're on a PvP server. Like I said, you might want something different. But this is very strong, and this is what many people would call the cookie cutter Unholy Death Knight PvE build. Alright, now that we have the glyphs and talents out of the way, let's talk the Unholy Damage Dance, also known as the Unholy Rotation. So you want to start every fight by using Icy Touch. This is a ranged ability, so it's very easy to use first while you're walking to the enemy, and then by the time you arrive, your GCD should be back, your global cooldown, and you can use Plague Strike, and now both of your Frost Fever and Blood Plague diseases are now on the target, and you can start using Blood Strike. You'll use Blood Strike twice, and then use Scourge Strike. At this point, you can pop your cooldowns and cast Summon Gargoyle. Now, the Gargoyle will get your stats at the time of casting, so that's why you pop the cooldowns right before you summon your Gargoyle. There's a lot of great cooldowns that go well with Summon Gargoyle. From there, you'd use Scourge Strike again. You could cast your Empower Rune Weapon, which refreshes all of your runes. You can then use Scourge Strike again 2 more times, go and use Blood Strike 2 times, and then use Blood Tap in order to convert a Blood Rune into a Death Rune, and then use Pestilence, and then Death Coil 3 times to be, that's a runic power dump, and then cast Horn of Winter, which actually generates 10 runic power. And it's not just a buff, it does generate 10 runic power. And then after that opener, which is like, getting all those cooldowns out of the way, it's a matter of just using 2 Scourge Strikes in a row, followed by 2 Death Strikes, followed by using up all your runic power on Death Coils, and then use Pestilence to refresh your diseases. Now, it's very important to always leave a Blood Rune or Blood Tap on you, ready to use on Pestilence to refresh your diseases. The reason is because you don't want to have to waste a Frost and an Unholy Rune to refresh Blood Plague and Frost Fever when it can be done with one Blood Rune. Remember, never use your last Blood Rune on Bloodstrike if your diseases are about to expire. That's worth saying again. Never use your last Blood Rune on Bloodstrike if your diseases are about to expire. It's so important that your diseases never expire, because if they're gone and you use like a Scourge Strike on a target without diseases, it's an absolute waste. Okay, let's talk about Unholy Gems next. Exactly which gem sockets go where depends on what gear you have, but generally Death Knights want Strength, Crit, Haste, and of course, most important of all, you need to be hit capped, which is 8%. So for your meta, you're going to want Chaotic Skyfire Diamond. This will grant you 21% critical strike rating and 3% increased critical strike damage. For your red socket, you'll want the Bold Cardinal Ruby. This will grant you a flat 20 strength. For your orange sockets, you could use something like Inscribed Amatrin or Fierce Amatrin, so that's going to be 10 strength, 10 crit strike rating, or 10 strength, 10 haste rating. For your blue gems, which you will need for your meta to be activated, I like to use the Sovereign Dreadstone. This is going to give you 10 strength and 15 stamina. And then basically, if you can afford it, get the Nightmare tier. This matches any socket, and it's a plus 10 to all stats. So yeah, I like to use that one. When it comes to Unholy Enchants, you can put Rune of the Fallen Crusader on your weapon. That's just straightforward and easily the best enchant. It's Death Knight only. When it comes to your head socket, use the Arcanum of Torment. This is 50 attack power, 20 crit. You have to be revered with the Knights of the Ebon Blade. For your shoulder, get a Greater Inscription of the Axe. This is 40 attack power and 15 crit. You have to be exalted with the Sons of Horde. For your cloak, get the Enchant Cloak Greater Speed, which gives you 23 haste. Or if you're a tailor, the better option would be Sword Guard Embroidery. If you, for your chest, you want Enchant Chest Powerful Stats. That's just 10 to all stats. For your bracers, 50 attack power. That's called Greater Assault. For your gloves, 44 attack power. That's called Crusher. Or if you are an engineer, go with the Hyper Speed Accelerators. That's very, very nice. For your belt, go ahead and get that extra gem socket from an internal belt buckle. Blacksmiths can make this. And also a frag belt if you're an engineer, to throw cobalt bombs from it. It's actually really strong. For your legs, get the 75 attack power and 22 crit from the Ice Scale leg armor. For your boots, 32 attack power from the Greater Assault enchant. Or if you're an engineer, get the Nitro boosts. It might be super helpful depending on the situation. Now, we mentioned a lot of, or if you have XYZ profession, go this. So I think it is the perfect time to talk a little bit more in depth about professions, the profession-specific bonuses, and which ones you should go as an Unholy Death Knight. So, talking about unholy professions, we're going to talk about profession-only bonuses in this section. So when it comes to straight-up stats, which professions grant the most, it would be a combination of jewel crafting and blacksmithing. Now, jewel crafting, you can equip 3 jewel crafting-only gems, which, if you're just doing strength, it'll be a 39 strength bonus over similarly socketed gems. So basically the jewel crafting only gems give more stats than the non-jewel crafting only stats. It'll be very, very strong if you go jewel crafting, of course. Blacksmithing will provide 2 extra gem sockets in the glove and bracer for a total passive of 40 additional strength, for example, with those 2 extra gem sockets. Another good combination that many people like is the jewel crafting plus engineering. Engineering is ridiculously awesome in PvE because of Nitro boots. On top of that, haste from the gloves enchant works really, really well with Gargoyle. Haste is very strong with Gargoyle. Tailoring, again, has that nice cloak enchant. You can always change it, if you want to go jewel crafting or blacksmithing, depending what profession you are, you can drop tailoring. Leatherworking has 76 attack power from fur lining attack power. Inscription has 64 attack power from Master's Inscription of the Axe, which is better than the Sons of Hode one. Enchanting has the ring enchants. You can get 80 attack power total combined from both attack power enchants on both rings. So I would say overall, a lot of these professions are pretty equal. Blizzard did a very nice job balancing them in my opinion, but I would say that jewel crafting plus blacksmithing have the highest raw stats. If you're literally made out of money, because I'm telling you that's going to take a lot of gold to level those two up without mining. But yeah, I would say those two are probably best in slot, but I would say jewel crafting engineering a close second, in my opinion. Okay, moving on, let's talk about unholy consumables. What consumables would you want to bring to a raid? You would want the Flask of Endless Rage, which increases attack power by 180. This is a Battle and Guardian elixir, of course, persisting through death. The Potion of Speed, which increases haste rating by 500 for 15 seconds. You might want to drink this right before you summon a gargoyle. You've got the Dragon Fin Fillet for your food. This will give you 40 strength, 40 stamina for 1 hour once you eat it. And then we cannot forget our pet food. That's right, Unholy Death Knight's ghouls are very, very important damage dealers, and we need to give them a buff, and the food of choice is the Spiced Mammoth Treats, increasing strength and stamina of your pet by 30 for 1 hour. Now let's talk about the Blood Death Knight next. Alright, we're going to talk Blood Death Knight, starting with leveling talent progression. What talents did you get? You're a fresh DK, you're in the starting zone. Let's talk about it. Well, I actually think Butchery is pretty nice. After you kill an enemy that grants experience or honor, you generate 20 runic power. In addition, you generate 2 runic power per 5 seconds while in combat. Also very good as Subversion, probably better than Butchery, but this is going to increase your critical strike chance with Blood Strike, Scourge Strike, Heart Strike, and Obliterate by 9%, else reduces your threat. But that 9% crit, very nice. Can't go wrong with that. I love two-handed weapon specialization. Just gives you a 4% damage, all damage increase, so that is super good. Get 1 point into Scent of Blood, giving you a 15% chance after dodging, parrying, or taking direct damage to gain Scent of Blood, causing your next melee hit to generate 10 runic power. So this is going to really help with your runic power generation. Kind of reminds me of like improved aspect of the Hawk for hunters. It's like you don't want to put more than 1 point into it because obviously it's just not worth it. From there, Bladed Armor, just put 2 points into it to unlock the next row. It's going to basically convert some of your armor into attack power. What you really want, in my opinion, is Dark Conviction. Get your Dark Conviction, man. Have conviction about darkness. It's going to give you 5% crit. It's very, very good, so highly recommend that one. And then Death Rune Mastery. This is basically like Reaping for Unholy. It's going to give you a chance to, when you use Death Strike or Obliterate, a 100% chance that the Frost and Unholy runes become Death Runes, which count as Blood, Frost, or Unholy. So that's very nice. Gives you that flexibility in your rotation. Now, from here, we're going to get more Bladed Armor so that we can unlock Bloody Strikes. Now, Bloody Strikes is amazing. This increases the damage of Blood Strike by 15% and Heart Strike by 45%, and increases the damage of Blood Boil by 30%. I mean, this is a bloody crazy talent. This is super good. Try to get this talent as soon as you can. You're also going to want Veteran of the Third War, increasing strength, stamina, and expertise. Very nice talent. Bloody Vengeance. This is going to give you a 3% bonus to physical damage after you deal a critical strike. If you played a Ret Paladin, then this talent sounds very familiar. It's basically the Death Knight version. Also, Abomination's Might. It's going to give you 2% total strength. Also, attack power to party and raid members. People like this buff. Hysteria, very good. Induces a friendly unit into a killing frenzy for 30 seconds. You're going to get physical damage improved by 20%, but you're also going to lose 1% of your max health every second, 3-minute cooldown, so it's actually quite nice. Bloodworms, this is pretty cool. You're going to have your weapon hits have a 9% chance to cause the target to spawn 2 to 4 bloodworms. Bloodworms attack your enemies, healing you as they do damage for 20 seconds or until killed. Now, some of you might be wondering, why didn't we get Vendetta, which heals you for, what, 6% of your max health with 3 points in it after you kill a target that yields experience or honor? Yes, that is good, but you know what? It doesn't make you do any more damage, and honestly, I think it slows your leveling down to just get this purely talent, but when there's plenty of sustain that also gives you damage at the same time, like Bloodworms. Now, another awesome ability at this point to get is Sudden Doom. Your Blood Strikes and Heart Strikes have a 15% chance to launch a free death coil at your target. That's amazing. Those procs are super happy fun time, doing extra damage. Also, improved Death Strike. This increases the damage of your Death Strike by 30% and increases its critical strike chance by 6%. And increases the healing granted by 50%. See, there's plenty of healing available in the blood tree. Like, you don't have to get Vendetta. So this is very, very strong. Another very, very strong talent you should totally go out of your way to get. And get Heart Strike as soon as you have those 40 points in blood, because Heart Strike is amazing. You're going to use this as part of your rotation all the time. It does 50% weapon damage to one target, 25% weapon damage to another. It's just very strong in general. And then Might of Mograine is incredibly strong too. It increases critical strike damage bonus of many of your abilities by 45%. So you definitely want to get the Might of Mograine as soon as you get a chance. And then from there, you need to top off Bladed Armor to 5 points in order to unlock Blood Gorged, which will give you 10% more damage, and your attacks ignore up to 10% of your opponent's armor at all times, assuming you are above 75% health. It's pretty nice, which you probably should be considering all of these abilities. Dancing Rune Weapon, gonna be nice, cooldown to pop for maybe boss fights or whatever. You pulled a lot of mobs. It summons a second rune weapon that fights on its own for 12 seconds, doing the same attacks as the Death Knight, but for 50% reduced damage, with only a 1-minute cooldown. So a nice, helpful talent to help you do more damage. Now, from here, I like to go over to the Unholy tree in order to finish out my leveling build. Vicious Strikes, giving you increased 6% crit chance and crit strike damage bonus for Plague Strike and Scourge Strike. 3 points in Virulence, giving you that 3% additional hit. From there, getting that total strength increased by 3%, also making your ghoul stronger and in both strength and stamina. Epidemic is very important, so that you don't have to constantly be reapplying Blood Plague and Frost Fever. Morbidity is very powerful. It's going to increase the damage and healing of Death Coil by 10%. Of course, you're going to be getting free Death Coils from Sudden Doom, so Morbidity is a nice talent there. And then what's really strong is Necrosis. Auto attacks deal an additional 20% shadow damage. I mean, it's just straight extra damage you can talent into guaranteed, assuming your auto attack hits. Auto attacking does lots of damage for Death Knights. And then Blood Caked Blade, very, very strong. Auto attacks have a 30% chance to cause a Blood Caked Strike, which hits for 25% weapon damage plus 12.5% for each of your diseases on the target. And this is the build that I would go if you are leveling as a Blood Death Knight in Wrath of the Lich King. And what's super great about this is that this is also your max level 80 Blood Death Knight specialization if you want to be a DPS. Alright, next we're going to talk about Blood Death Knight tanking, which is quite popular in Wrath of the Lich King for the Blood spec. More popular than DPS, I would say, and it is the best tanking specialization that Death Knights can actually go. So, for a Blood Death Knight, switching over to tanking, we're just going to go through this pretty quickly. So, at max level, you're not going to want Butchery anymore. You're going to want Blade Barrier. This is going to give you a 5% decrease on damage taken whenever your blood runes are on cooldown, which is pretty nice. Scent of Blood is pretty good as well, giving you a 15% chance after dodging to make your next 2 melee hits generate 10 runic power. That's nice. Two-handed weapon specialization, doing more damage means more threat, and that is always good. Dark Conviction, giving you that increased chance to critically hit with weapons, spells, and abilities by 5%, which is quite good. The Death Rune Mastery will allow your Death Strike or Obliterate to convert the Frost and Unholy runes used into Death Runes, which count as Blood, Frost, or Unholy. 5 points into Bladed Armor. That's going to give you a bunch of attack power because you're going to have tons of armor as a plate-wearing class. Veteran of the Third War, very, very powerful. It's going to give you nice stamina, expertise, and strength. Bloody Strikes is incredible. Again, this is one of the powerhouse talents that is just so good, increasing damage of Blood Strike and Heart Strike and Blood Boil, believe it or not. Very, very strong talent. Abomination's Might is very good, as well as Bloody Vengeance, giving you more physical damage bonus. This is a nice raid-wide buff, increasing attack power by 10%, so that's very nice, also getting that increased strength. Hysteria is a very powerful buff. Improved Death Strike is incredibly powerful, along with Vampiric Blood is a wonderful Blood Death Knight. Cooldown to use in situations where you're being bursted or you're low health. Will of the Necropolis is huge, which is going to help you survive when you're low health. It's going to reduce damage taken by 15% when you're below 35% health. Blood Strike, very, very helpful for keeping aggro. Might of Mograine is very powerful, increasing critical strike damage bonuses of a lot of your abilities. And then Blood Gorged is also very, very good. Now, other than these talents, you might be wondering, what else should we get? Well, I personally highly recommend getting Toughness, increasing your armor value from items by 10%, and reducing duration of all movement slowing effects by 30%. Toughness is very good. It's definitely going to, be helping with bladed armor, increasing your armor value. And then also getting improved Icy Touch is very powerful. That's going to help with aggro generation. Icy Touch is an ability that actually generates the highest amount of aggro, so having it do even more damage is actually very important for that reason. 5 points into Anticipation for getting that increased avoidance. 5% dodge chance is very helpful, because if you dodge an attack, that is great mitigation. And then I also like to put 2 points into Epidemic. This is going to allow you to do your rotation without any snags. It's going to be very, very nice to basically have that increased duration on your diseases, because if you look at the glyphs over here, we're not getting the Glyph of Disease. Now, the Glyph of Disease, if you remember from the Unholy Death Knight video, it allows your Pestilence to refresh the duration of Blood Fever and Frost, or Blood Plague and Frost Fever on the primary target. Very, very powerful. We don't get that. There's better runes here. Glyph of Rune Strike, Glyph of Vampiric Blood. I mean, this is pretty powerful. 10% increased critical strike chance, improved Vampiric Blood is very strong, because this is a very strong ability. You want to improve it. And then Death Strike, Glyph of Death Strike, increases Death Strike damage by 1% for every 1 runic power you currently have, up to a maximum of 25%, and the runic power is not consumed by this effect. So very strong major glyphs, but again, we're not going to have Glyph of Disease, so Epidemic is even more valuable for that reason. Now, we do have 4 points left, and this is where there's sort of room for your own personalization of your tanking build. Now, personally, what I like to do, is I actually really like Spell Deflection. You have a chance equal to your parry chance of taking 45% less damage from a direct damage spell. Now, I think that's just super strong. This is just always on as a passive, so it can be very, very helpful in situations where you're up against a lot of spells being casted. So personally, I absolutely really like this ability. The last ability, frankly, could go one of many places. Like if you're not hit capped, maybe you want to put it in Virulence. Maybe you want to put 1 point into Black Ice just to do more Frost and Shadow damage. Can't go wrong with that. It's very powerful. But generally speaking, this is sort of the build that I would go. I think this is a very powerful build, and will suit you very well for PvE Blood Death Knight tanking. All right, now that we went through talents, let's move on and talk about blood abilities and rotation. So when it comes to a single target, the rotation is Icy Touch, Plague Strike, and then Heart Strike, Heart Strike, Heart Strike. Now, Heart Strike is a great damage ability, hits up to 2 targets, which is very nice as well, does a percentage of weapon damage, so it's very, very nice. And essentially that is on repeat. You would just do that over and over. When Frost Fever and Blood Plague go down, then reapply Icy Touch and Plague Strike, and then go back to Heart Strike. Pretty straightforward. If you are trying to hold threat on more than 2 targets where Heart Strike is no longer going to be enough, then you're going to need to start using Blood Boil, which is a nice AoE ability and helpful for generating threat on multiple targets. Once again, Icy Touch does a great job generating aggro, and it's also ranged, so it's a great ability. Death Strike is very, very helpful as well as a self-heal, and actually does quite good damage, so mixing in Death Strikes make Blood do quite nice self-heals. In the scenario of multiple targets or AoE, Death and Decay is a great ability for holding threat. Now, on the Warmane private server, it's bugged, so many people don't think that Blood Death Knights have great AoE threat generation. Simply not the case. Death and Decay and Blood Boil are pretty good. Blood tanks are very strong. I think they cover most bases, but anyways, that's aside the point. Death and Decay is part of the rotation for multiple targets. You're going to use Death and Decay, Icy Touch, Plague Strike, Pestilence, so you can spread those diseases everywhere, and then you will use Blood Boil, doing tons of AoE damage. You'll then use Death Strike as needed to keep yourself alive with self-heals, and more Blood Boils. That's essentially the way to do it. Now, when it comes to blood glyphs, we did talk about this in the tanking talent section, but you're going to want Glyph of Rune Strike to get that 10% increased critical strike chance, which is very strong. Glyph of Vampiric Blood to increase its duration because it's an excellent defensive cooldown, and then Glyph of Blood Strike is extremely powerful, and you will be using Death Strike for self-heals. That does help a lot. Some of the minor glyphs, Horn of Winter increases its duration, Glyph of Raised Dead will make it so you no longer need Corpse Dust in order to raise your ghoul, and then Glyph of Pestilence will increase the radius by 5 yards, which is very nice for spreading those diseases all over the place. Up next, let's talk about some gems for the Blood Death Knight. Now, of course, your gemming situation will change based on your build, your current equipment, if you've reached certain caps, for example. So, depending on what stage you're at, it might change, but generally speaking, some of your caps are, you're going to want 8% hit, you're going to want 26 expertise, and if you are a tank, you're going to want 540 defense to be defense capped. When it comes to your meta gem for tanking, you'll want the Austere Earthsiege Diamond. Red gems, generally speaking, you'll want to use Regal Dreadstone. You could also use a Nightmare tier in this slot. For blue gems, you'll want the Solid Majestic Zircon, and for yellow, you could also go with the Solid Majestic Zircon. For blood enchants, you're going to want on your head the Arcanum of the Stalwart Protector, your shoulder the Greater Inscription of the Gladiator, on your back or your cloak you'll want Titan Weave or Mighty Armor, for chest you'll want Super Health, for bracers Major Stamina, gloves you'll want Armsman, on the waist you'll want to use the Eternal Belt Buckle for an extra socket, for your legs put on the Frost Hide Leg Armor, for your boots put on Tuskar's Vitality. And last, for your weapon, of course, we're going to go with a Rune Blade enchant. The Rune of the Stone Skin Gargoyle is best for tanking. Now, when it comes to blood professions, I think that jewel crafting is incredible. You will get those 3 jewel crafting only gems, which are roughly 20% better than non-jewel crafting only gems, so something like 60 additional stamina if you go jewel crafting, which is quite nice. Leatherworking, you can get the fur lining if you, this is profession specific, right? You can either get some extra 70 extra resistance of your choice, or you can get about 62 stamina from the fur lining. Engineering has some nice bonuses as well. The nitro boots, you can also get the engineering belt, which you can actually find quite useful, I bet, throwing the cobalt bomb for that AoE damage. Blacksmithing, allowing 2 extra sockets, so that could be an additional 60 stamina potentially, or depending on what gems you use. So blacksmithing, jewel crafting, very, very good combination. When it comes to mining, it could also be a decent profession for a tank because it does grant you 60 stamina, something like that. It grants you extra health I think it's less than 60 stamina in Wrath of the Lich King. So it's not the best, but it's decent. And you can also use it to gather materials for jewel crafting and blacksmithing before you drop it and later swap to a different profession. When it comes to blood consumables, for tanking, you're going to want the Flask of Stone Blood. For food, you want the Rhinolicious Worm Steak, or the Snapper Extreme, or even the Blackened Dragon Fin. Depends on the fight, of course, and all these different situations. When it comes to potions, you'll might likely be popping lots of indestructible potions, but you'll also want some runic healing potions on you just in case. And with all of that said, let's move on to the third and final talent specialization for Death Knights, Frost. Alright, moving on to Frost, we're going to be talking about the Frost Death Knight talent progression. Right when you're starting a new Death Knight, you're in the Death Knight starting zone, getting lots of talents real fast. It's a lot of fun. You're going to want that improved Icy Touch first. 15% additional damage. Very, very nice. It's also going to give you some damage mitigation in the form of a reduced melee and ranged attack speed by 6%. Incredible. And then you're going to get 2 points into Runic Power Mastery, increasing your maximum Runic Power by 30, which is very nice. Now, from this point, you're going to have a two-hander, right? So you don't really want Nerves of Steel, but you're going to want it later. Depending on when you get your two one-handers is when you decide to start putting points into this. Granted, you can play Frost without having two one-handers, so perhaps you don't want this talent at all, which is why I would then put points into Black Ice, because it's incredibly powerful, increasing Frost and Shadow damage by 8%, up to 10% with 5 points, so that's a great talent indeed. I'd also get Icy Talons immediately next. This is going to reduce their melee attack speed, and it's also going to increase yours by 20%. So when their attack speed is reduced, yours will be increased by 20%. That's really strong. This is also incredibly strong. Annihilation, increasing the critical strike chance of your melee special abilities by 3%, so 3% crit. In addition, there's a 100% chance that your Obliterate will do its damage without consuming diseases. Now that's incredibly important. If you didn't know, Obliterate, it's very powerful, but it does take diseases off, so this talent is super necessary for Frost to be able to use Obliterate repeatedly in a rotation without excuse me, without having to refresh Frost Fever and Blood Plague, the two diseases that make it do so much more damage. Now from there, Killing Machine's extremely powerful. Melee attacks have a chance to make your next Icy Touch, Howling Blast, or Frost Strike a critical strike, so that's super strong. You're definitely going to want that one. Chill of the Grave is very good, generating more runic power when using Chains of Ice, Howling Blast, Icy Touch, and Obliterate. I also really like Endless Winter, just getting 4% increased strength. You can't go wrong with that. Glacier Rot, very powerful. Diseased enemies take 20% more damage from Icy Touch, Howling Blast, and Frost Strike. So this is incredibly powerful. You should definitely get this ASAP. Improved Icy Talons is very nice, increasing the melee haste of all party and raid members within 100 yards by 20%, and your haste by an additional 5%. This is a very, very good buff to provide to everyone. People will love you for it. Merciless Combat, your Icy Touch, Howling Blast, Obliterate, and Frost Strike do an additional 12% damage when striking targets with less than 35% health. So you're doing a ton more damage when targets are low health. This is sort of like Execute Phase. Frost Death Knights do more against bosses, makes them powerful in that situation, but obviously this is going to help with everything, because everything is going to be below 35% health before you kill it. Rhyme is also a very good talent, increasing the critical strike chance of your Icy Touch and Obliterate by 15%, and casting Obliterate has a 15% chance to reset the cooldown on Howling Blast and cause your next Howling Blast to consume no runes. Rhyme, very powerful. You're going to want to keep an eye on those procs so that you can use Howling Blast ASAP after you get that proc. Now, from this point, you're definitely going to want Unbreakable Armor. This is an incredibly powerful cooldown you can pop with a 1-minute cooldown, which reinforces your armor with a thick coat of ice, increasing your armor by 25% and increasing your strength by 20% for 20 seconds. 20% increased strength, that's huge. It's a massive cooldown that you're going to want to pop, you know, pretty much before you're popping all of your cooldowns to burst something down. Blood of the North is another really great talent. Increases Blood Strike and Frost Strike damage by 10%. In addition, whenever you hit with Blood Strike or Pestilence, there is a 100% chance that the Blood Rune will become a Death Rune when it activates. Death runes count as Blood, Frost, or Unholy. Now, Blood of the North is exactly the same as Reaping, as well as Death Rune Mastery. It's right here in the Frost tree. It's always very helpful. Another talent you want to get right away is Frost Strike. This is a strike that costs runic power, 40 runic power. Instantly strike the enemy, causing 55% weapon damage plus 48 as frost damage. So this is why frost is very powerful. A lot of their damage comes from frost, so it's super powerful. Definitely want to get Frost Strike as soon as you possibly can. Now, Guile of Gorefiend is another really strong talent. It's going to increase the critical strike damage bonus of your Blood Strike, Frost Strike, Howling Blast, and Obliterate abilities by 45%, which is super strong. You also get an increased 6-second duration on Icebound Fortitude, which is a defensive cooldown that all Death Knights get. So Guile of Gorefiend is very good. Now, Threat of Thessarian is a talent that you would get if you are dual wielding. So if you are dual wielding, this is going to give you a 100% chance to also deal damage with your offhand weapon. So when you strike with Death Strike, Obliterate, Plague, Rune, Blood Strike, any of your strikes, they'll also deal damage with your offhand weapon. So in this current build, we don't have Nerves of Cold Steel, but let's say you do get 2 one-handers, you're going to want this talent. You're going to want both these talents if you have 2 one-handers. So keep that in mind. But we're not doing 2 one-handers right now. So once you're at this phase, there are a couple different options. You could get some damage mitigation from Frigid Dreadplate. If you're on a PvP server, you might want Lichborn. Draws upon unholy energy to become undead for 10 seconds. While undead, you are immune to charm, fear, and sleep effects. Very powerful, as you can imagine. This, of course, you can be turned undead, or turn undead as a paladin spell. They can fear you. You can also be shackled by a priest. So there's a number of potential bad side effects that can happen if you go Lichborn. But again, this is all PvP scenario. It's not too much of an issue in this particular scenario. But the next talent that I would recommend for you is probably going either Icy Reach, which will give you an increased range of your Icy Touch Chains of Ice, and Howling Blast by 10 yards. You'd only have to put 1 point into that. You could also just put 1 point into Lichborn. It's up to you. I'd probably do Lichborn just for that extra utility. And then Tundra Stalker. Put 5 points into that. Your spells and abilities deal 15% more damage to targets infected with Frost Fever. Also increase your expertise by 5, and then go ahead and get Howling Blast. Now from that point, you could move over to Blood, get Subversion. 9% crit is just so worth it. Like, get that talent ASAP. Your Obliterate, getting that extra crit. I mean, all your strikes, but 9% crit is very strong. And then Vicious Strikes and Virulence, more critical strike chance, so that's super good. And then you also want Epidemic, as well as Ravenous Dead. And then you can finish off the build with 5 points into Necrosis. Oh my goodness, I have extra points. So at this point, I would totally get Blood-Caked Blade then with the last 2. So this is sort of the build. You're going to be doing tons of damage with it. And again, the build would be a little bit different. So this is with a 2-hander. If you have 2 one-handers, then you're going to take some points out of here. You can take some points out of... Where did I put this extra point? Right here, actually. We're going to put it into this. Nerves of Steel. Nerves of Steel is super important for when you are dual wielding, so you're going to want to do something like that. And then yeah, I would say if you are dual wielding, this is the build you're going to want to go with in this situation. I feel like I've misplaced a point somewhere where it shouldn't be, but I'm not sure where it is. But anyways, if this is the 2 one-handers, I would go this build. If you want to go with a 2-hander, I would go the other build. Oh, here, this is the point. There we go. This is the one-hander build. This is what PvE DPS Frost Death Knights would use in a PvE situation to maximize their damage. When it comes to Glyphs, Glyph of Frost Strike reduces the cost of Frost Strike by 8 runic power. When it comes to another major one, Obliterate. Glyph of Obliterate is so good. I remember back in the day, it was just incredible, increasing the damage of Obliterate by 25%. Obliterate does so much damage. And then Glyph of Disease, extremely important for DPS. This is going to save you a Frost rune as well as an Unholy rune from having to cast Icy Touch and Plague Strike. Instead, you can just cast Pestilence, and that will refresh your diseases for you. And then, of course, the minor runes don't matter too much, but, you know, Pestilence increases the range, that's notable, but this is just no longer requiring a reagent called Corpse Dust, and increase the duration of Horn of Winter, but you'll be using Horn of Winter much more frequently than 2 minutes, which with this it'll be 3-minute cooldown, or 3-minute duration, but yes, you'll be using it more frequently because it grants 10 runic power. Anyways, this is the setup, and it will serve you very well. Alright, moving on from talents, let's talk about frost abilities and rotation. So as a DPS, you're going to want to start with Icy Touch to apply Frost Fever, and then you're going to use Plague Strike to put on Blood Plague, and then you'll want to use Obliterate, which will do a ton of damage, and because we have the Annihilation talent, Obliterate will do its damage without consuming diseases, so you can then go use Frost Strike, and then Blood Strike, and then cast Pestilence, because we have the Glyph of Disease, and Pestilence will refresh the duration of diseases on your target. You can then use Horn of Winter for additional runic power, and then cast another Frost Strike, followed by 2 more Obliterates and a Frost Strike, and just repeat that cycle, minus the Icy Touch and the Plague Strike, because you already have Frost Fever and Blood Plague, and all you have to do is use Pestilence in order to get those diseases refreshed. Remember, never use your last Blood rune, and if your diseases are about to expire, you must save that for Pestilence. You don't want your diseases falling off. Now, for gemming for the Frost Death Knight, you have a couple of options. Of course, it's always going to depend on what stat you need, but generally speaking, you're going to want to go for a Relentless Earth Siege Diamond for your meta gem. For red gems, generally speaking, you're going to want Bold Cardinal Rubies, Fractured Cardinal Rubies, or Etched Amatrin if you're not hit capped. For yellow, Fierce Amatrin. You're also going to want to look for Rigid King's Amber, if you're not hit capped. For blue, you could use the Nightmare Tear to fill that slot. When it comes to enchants, for your head slot, you'll want the Arcanum of Torment. For the shoulder, the Greater Inscription of the Axe. For the cloak, the Greater Speed or Major Agility. For your chest, Powerful Stats. For your bracers, enchant Bracers Greater Assault. For your gloves, enchant Gloves Crusher. For your waist, Eternal Belt Buckle. That will give you another socket. For your legs, you're going to want the Ice Scale Leg Armor. And then for your boots, you're going to want Tuskar's Vitality or Greater Assault. Now when it comes to your weapons, Rune of Razor Ice is great for your main hand, and then for your offhand, Rune of the Fallen Crusader. If you're using a two-hander, use Rune of the Fallen Crusader, but I think generally it's accepted that if you're playing Frost, you're going to have 2 one-handers. When it comes to professions, we're going to talk about strictly profession-only bonuses. I would say that Jewel Crafting plus Blacksmithing offers a lot of straight-up stats. Jewel Crafting gets 3x Jewel Crafting-only gems, so you're going to have a bonus over similarly socketed gems, something like a 20% bonus. I think I did the math, and it'll give you 39 bonus strength if you go Jewel Crafting. If you go Blacksmithing, you'll get 2 extra gem sockets, so a total passive 40% strength, for example, from those extra sockets. Just regular Cardinal Rubies, Bold Cardinal Rubies. Jewel Crafting Engineering is a wonderful profession because of the haste enchant on the gloves. Can always be very helpful for Death Knights, getting their runes back faster. Tailoring has a nice cloak enchant. You can always get that one on your cloak, which is very nice. And then leatherworking, you can either get 76 attack power from fur lining, or you could get 70 resistance from fur lining, so some nice options from leatherworking. Inscription has 64 attack power enchantment on the shoulder called Master's Inscription of the Axe, which is in fact better than the enchantment from the Sons of Hodir getting Exalted enchant, so it's up to you whichever one you want to go with. Enchanting, you can enchant rings. You get about 80 attack power from both combined. Attack power enchants on each ring. A lot of these professions, in my opinion, are very, very equal. Blizzard did a wonderful job balancing them, but I would say that jewel crafting and blacksmithing have the highest raw stats. So if you're made out of money and you can afford both professions, I would go jewel crafting plus blacksmithing. Now, when it comes to consumables for the Frost Death Knight DPS, for the flask, I would get the Flask of Endless Rage. You're going to want Potions of Speed. You're going to want to eat Hearty Rhino, which will help you with your armor penetration cap. You could also get Dragon Fin Fillet, which is plus 40 strength, which is probably the best if you're looking for just strength build. And once again, when it comes to best in slot for a Frost Death Knight, I would say it very much depends on how Blizzard releases Wrath of the Lich King classic phases and itemization. So I could put down some BiS, but it really is going to depend and could potentially change on what Blizzard decides how they're going to do Wrath of the Lich King classic. So I will either put it in the description when it's available and we know, or I will make a separate video detailing what the best in slot items are. Now, when it comes to Death Knight add-ons, I think there are a few things that are very important. Number one, you're going to want something to help you with your rune tracking. It's very important knowing when runes are available, when they're about to be available. The UI in the top left is so small and sort of out of the way that it's not super helpful, so something to help with that. You're also going to want some form of runic power bar that's much bigger, so you know when you're close to max. You don't want to sit at max. It's very similar to rage. You want to use it or you are being inefficient. And then you also need to have some form of disease tracker to know when both frost fever and blood plague are on your target. It's very important to always have those up. So I would say weak auras can probably do that for you. Hopefully that add-on is still in existence by the time you're watching this, but it's an excellent add-on to use. Now, when it comes to Death Knight macros, I'll just throw a bunch on the screen here. There's a ton of them that are really cool. There's a lot of PvP ones where you can throw your ghoul at your focus target, and then he'll gnaw, which is a stun. There's a ton where you can build in your rune strike into all of your other abilities. There's another one where you can pop all your cooldowns, your trinkets, pop a potion of speed, and then summon your gargoyle so it does maximum damage. There's a Chains of Ice focus macro, and on and on and on. There are tons. So I'm going to post these probably in like a Google Doc or something in the description so you can just copy paste and use at your convenience. All right, next up, we're going to talk about Death Knight tanking in Wrath of the Lich King Classic. And we're going to start with stats. What stats should you get on your Death Knight tank? Well, really important one's actually defense rating. You're going to want to get 540 of it. The reason you want to do that is because that is the defense cap. Now, once you're defense capped, you can no longer be critically hit in PvE. This is super important because if you're getting crit in PvE, your healer is going to be getting anxiety, and you don't want to give your healer anxiety. It's going to make you much more tanky having that defense cap. It also increases the damage mitigation of Icebound Fortitude, and your chance to be hit will be decreased by 5.6%. A bunch of reasons to get that defense cap. Everyone's going to thank you. Now, when it comes to resilience, I don't recommend going out of your way and getting it. I don't recommend getting any of it on your gear, actually. But if you have it laying around, it actually does reduce the chance to be critically hit in PvE as well as PvP in Wrath of the Lich King. It isn't until Mists of Pandaria where that turns into PvP resilience and has no effect in PvE. Now, when it comes to hit rating, you're going to want about 9% spell hit and 8% melee hit. Now, the reason for those two numbers is because 9% spell hit combined with the plus 8% hit from Glyph of Dark Command will guarantee that you never miss a taunt. And that can be very important to be able to have that consistency with your threat generation, being able to get those snap taunts whenever you need them. And of course, that 8% melee hit cap is going to be very important so that you never miss a death strike, so that you're always getting your health back when you expect to be. Now, when it comes to expertise, there's a lot to know about it. I'm going to try to sum it up for you. 26 expertise is dodge cap, when your attacks can no longer be dodged. If you get 20 expertise from gear and 6 from the talent veteran of the Third War in the blood talent tree, you're going to be dodge capped. Of course, dodge cap can be very helpful if you want to avoid getting your death strikes dodged. Again, that powerful self-heal ability. Alternatively, if you're not playing Blood, you can bring 21 expertise from gear. You get an additional 5 from Tundra Stalker talent in the Frost tree, or Rage of Revendare in the Unholy tree if you're playing Deep Frost or Unholy tank. Now, parry cap is 56 expertise, when your attacks can no longer be parried. If you bring 50 expertise from gear, you get that other 6 from Veteran of the Third War. Now, the reason parry cap is important, and the reason I'm bringing it up, is because of parry haste. Now, parry haste is a reduced swing time for a creature's next swing after it successfully parries an attack. However, only a few bosses have this mechanic enabled, and those bosses are Halion, Lady Death Whisper, Syndragosa, Onyxia, Acid Maw, Dreadscale, and Ice Howl. Now, the only real threats on this list, in my opinion, are Syndragosa and Halion, so you should parry cap for those bosses specifically, especially in ICC 25-man heroic. These bosses can get very, very powerful when they get that parry haste. Now, when it comes to stamina, this is your top priority stat, and the reason for that is because many Death Knight heals are a percentage of total HP, so the more you have, the more you're going to heal. For example, Death Strike is a percentage, Vampiric Blood is a percentage, and Rune Tap is another one, so pretty much all of Death Knight heals are going to be a percent of total HP, making your self heals much more effective if you have bigger health pool. When it comes to armor, this is what mitigates physical damage. Plate items will have the most armor and cloth will have the least, so I recommend you wear plate to maximize your armor, and you're also going to get 5 attack power for every 180 armor you have when you spec into bladed armor, which is at the top of the blood tree. Now, when it comes to dodge and parry chance or avoidance, I would say they're very helpful stats in order to use more rune strikes, which can only be used after you dodge or parry. And you'll also get increased damage mitigation from Army of the Dead, which gives you damage mitigation based on your dodge and parry chance. However, if you focus too much on dodge and parry, in my opinion, and you get unlucky and you don't dodge or parry, then you're going to die really quickly. So I would suggest you aim for maximizing your defense rating first, get that defense cap, then just dump everything you can into stamina, and of course, get as much armor as you can, and that is your core survivability stats that I recommend. Now, moving away from stats, let's start diving into different Blood, Death Knight talents, as well as Frost and Unholy, as well as the glyphs that you should get with those specializations. First up, let's talk about my favorite build of all, the standard Blood Death Knight tank. Now, the reason I like this build so much is because it brings both Abomination's Might and improved Icy Talons. This is 10% attack power and 20% melee haste to the entire party in raid. The only other place you can get 20% melee haste is from Wind Fury Totem from a Shaman. Any Shaman can bring that. Abomination's Might, Marksman Hunter can also bring that, or an enhanced Shaman. But this is very, very helpful for your tank to be able to provide both those buffs. On top of that, this has very powerful survivability talents in this tree. You've got all sorts of good stuff. You've got Rune Tap, you've got Abomination's Might, you've got Spell Deflection. You have a ton of very strong damage mitigation talents, making this very, very popular for standard Blood tanks. When it comes to your glyphs, Glyph of Disease makes it so that you can just use Pestilence, and both your diseases on the target will be refreshed to their maximum duration. Glyph of Dark Command we talked about a little bit earlier. That's going to make sure that your Taunt or Dark Command will always hit. Glyph of Vampiric Blood is a very powerful defensive cooldown, which restores your health and then makes it so that you get more health back from healing restoration effects. That's going to increase its duration. When it comes to minor glyphs, they typically are cosmetic in nature or help very, very minorly, but Glyph of Horn of Winter will increase your the duration of that by a minute. Glyph of Raised Dead, so they have no reagent for that. And then Glyph of Pestilence will actually give you plus 5 yard radius. I think that's the most helpful of all of them. And of course, if you have enough spell hit or you're not worried about your Dark Command hitting, you can replace that with Glyph of Rune Tap. So one of my favorite builds of all time. Can't wait to try this one out. It's got pretty much everything you could possibly want for a spec, and it's very standard. This is a variation of that build. This is the higher threat Blood Death Knight tank build. You can see we sacrificed a few things. Mark of Blood is gone. We got 1 point out of Spell Deflection. We also got 3 more points into Bloody Strikes. So you're going to be doing much more damage. You also got Heart Strike in this build, so you are going to have that ability to that's basically going to give you also increased damage. So this is more more of a threat generation, high threat Blood Death Knight build, sacrificing just a little bit of survivability, but really not that much, to be totally honest. And it still brings those two talents, Abomination's Might and Improved Icy Talons. So this is also a very powerful and very popular Death Knight blood tanking build. But let's move on to Unholy. Now, this is a dungeon crawler Unholy DK tank build. I was really getting into this. I was like, wow, this is awesome. It's very different, and this is actually ideal for 5-man groups where this Death Knight's going to be dealing with a lot of AoE targeting. You're the only tank. You're not just the main tank. So this build is really optimized for that. You can see you've got Morbidity at the top for reduced cooldown on Death and Decay, which you're going to be using a lot. You've got Desecration, 1 point in there, gives 25% AoE move speed reduction, which is very, very powerful. Corpse Explosion can be used for more AoE threat generation. That does a ton of damage, and you also have a permanent ghoul with the Master of Ghouls talent. Now, the Corpse Explosion can be used on any corpse, or if you're in a desperate situation, you can also sacrifice your ghoul, making it explode for a ton of shadow AoE damage. So this build has much better AoE threat generation than the previous builds we looked at, and that's why this is very, very good for dungeons. So if you're the type of person who just wants to spam dungeons, whether they're regular or heroic, this is a great build for it. When it comes to Glyphs, Glyph of Death and Decay gives plus 20% damage to Death and Decay. That's huge. Glyph of Rune Strike, plus 10% critical strike chance. Very, very strong. Glyph of the Ghoul is very strong as well, giving your ghoul an extra 40% of your strength and stamina, really beefing it up. Then some minor runes, Glyph of Blood Tap, so it doesn't do damage to you. Glyph of Corpse Explosion, so the radius is even bigger, can be very, very helpful. Then Glyph of Raised Dead, so there's no reagent. Very helpful when you have a permanent ghoul and you're going to be summoning that a lot. So this is a very fun build. Highly recommend you check it out. You can even switch some points around if you feel that's necessary. If you want Desecration to be minus 50% move speed, if you prefer, whatever suits your fancy. But very, very cool dungeon crawler Unholy Death Knight build. Now moving on to Frost. This is a two-handed Frost Death Knight tank build. Frost is incredibly powerful. Reading through some of these talents, I was surprised. There is a ton of really good stuff here. So right off the bat, this build brings Abomination's Might and Improved Icy Talons, which the raids are going to be very happy for you to bring. But Acclamation is a very strong talent which boosts spell resistances, so that's very, very awesome. Depending on how many times you get hit by a spell, you're going to generate more and more resistance against it. That's what Acclamation does. It's there at the bottom. Unbreakable Armor is a defensive cooldown, which is going to help boost your strength and physical damage reduction by boosting your armor, so situationally very helpful. And then Improved Frost Presence is actually really cool. Basically everything that Frost Presence does, it's just going to do a little bit more, so that just generally helps damage mitigation. Death Chill and Glacier Rot are both going to improve threat generation. Death Chill is going to make your next basically Frost ability be a critical strike, and then Glacier Rot is going to make your diseases do more damage. So it's super strong. Nice bonuses to actually Glacier Rot's also going to improve Icy Touch damage, so huge threat generation ability there. When it comes to Glyphs, Glyph of Disease is really nice because, once again, Pestilence is going to refresh your diseases. Instead of having to use 2 runes, you can use just 1. Glyph of Dark Command, so you can be confident your taunts won't miss. Glyph of Unbreakable Armor is very strong as well. It's going to increase the amount that you get from Unbreakable Armor. And then Glyph of Horn of Winter, same thing we talked about with the other ones. It's noted down there. So really strong build. Highly recommend, actually. Frost Death Knight tank can be quite powerful. Now, dual wielding Frost Death Knight tanks, slightly different. You can see the main difference is that you're sacrificing Black Ice a little bit, and you're putting some points into Nerves of Cold Steel instead. So you're reducing a little bit of spell damage for getting more offhand damage, as well as 3% crit or 3% hit. It's very necessary. When you're dual wielding, you're still going to miss. It's really hard to never miss attacks when you're dual wielding, just because of how Blizzard designed having 2 one-handers. But this build's still definitely very viable, and it's very strong as well. Very similar to the two-handed version as well. Now let's talk about the rotation for each of these specializations. So for the standard blood tank, it's pretty straightforward. You're going to open up with an Icy Touch, Plague Strike, Pestilence, and Rune Strike when you're facing more than one mob. Follow up the next Blood Rune with a Blood Boil. Of course, just continue this rotation. In this particular scenario, this is the setup. If you're setting up against a single monster, maybe that's a boss, then you're going to use Blood Strike instead of the Pestilence and the Blood Boil. When it comes to after having those initial diseases set up, you can switch over and start using Death Strike and Blood Strike. And then once you've turned your Frost and Unholy runes into Death runes by using Death Strike, you can then start using Icy Touches for lots and lots of threat generation. Icy Touch is the single highest threat generation ability for single target that Death Knights have, and potentially the highest generating threat ability in the game if you're in Frost Presence. So this is sort of the rotation. You can open up in 3 different ways, or I guess 2 different ways, depending on if it's an AoE pull or if it's a single target pull. And then from there, switch over to using Death Strike, Icy Touch, Pestilence to refresh your diseases. And I kind of wrote that down there. Once you have both diseases up, go ahead and use Death Strike to convert those runes into Death runes. You're going to want to use Blood Strike on cooldown. You want to keep your Blood runes on cooldown as much as you can so that you can activate Blade Barrier, which is going to be a very nice defensive cooldown. That's only going to be active once your Blood runes are on cooldown. Runic Power should only be used on Rune Strike, but if you are the off tank or you're not currently being attacked, you can use Death Coil to dump your Runic Power instead if you have the global cooldowns available. So this is a pretty basic thing. You might want to run through it a few times, practice the rotation, one time for AoE pulls, one time for single target, but it's all here, all the information you need to reference. Now it comes for the rotation for the Dungeon Crawler Unholy Death Knight build. It's a little bit different. You're going to be using Death and Decay as your opener. Death and Decay you're going to be using a lot. That's why you got Morbidity. And then from there you can use Icy Touch, Plague Strike, Pestilence for the AoE pull. Again, if it's single target, go with that Blood Strike. And then after you use Pestilence, your next Blood Rune could be used on Blood Boil, again for that AoE pull. And again, I kind of wrote it out here, but Icy Touch, when used in Frost Presence, is the highest single target threat generating ability. So very, very powerful. You want to use that as much as you can in order to ensure that your DPS never ever take aggro from you. Death and Decay is fantastic for AoE pulls, especially since you specialized into it with this build, and you've got the Glyph. Death Strike, very powerful self-heal, but more importantly is going to be converting your runes into death runes, allowing you to spam Icy Touch in the future. So this is, if you're going to be a pro Death Knight tank, you use a lot of Death Strikes in preparation for needing big threat generation. So let's say right before a boss, you use Death Strike twice. So now you have literally 4 death runes, right? So you've got 4 death runes and you've got 2 blood runes ready. So you can basically do 4 Icy Touches, and then you can do two Blood Strikes. Obviously you probably want to use a Plague Strike in there before you start using Blood Strike, but you can do a ton of threat generation by converting your runes to death runes in anticipation of needing to do a ton of threat. Now what's really cool about the Dungeon Crawler Unholy Death Knight build is that you have a ghoul. And the ghouls come with Gnaw, which is a 3-second stun on a 1-minute cooldown. You can use this either for damage mitigation, just to stop taking damage, or you can use it to pick up loose mobs. You can have your ghoul leap on a target and then gnaw it, and then it gives you enough time to get over there and then pick up that mob that was loose. So a lot of flexibility with this build. Again, I'm like, wow, this is a really cool build, the Dungeon Crawler Unholy Death Knight build. So moving on to defensive cooldowns. So basically, Death Knights come equipped with a couple cool cooldowns. They've got Icebound Fortitude, which reduces all damage taken by 30%. This is one of your best cooldowns because it's all damage. So Icebound Fortitude should be used in situations when you're almost certain you're going to die, or huge damage is coming. This is, I would say, one of your most powerful cooldowns that you have available. Army of the Dead, while channeling, the Death Knight takes less damage equal to the dodge plus parry chance. So depending on your dodge and parry, this will be different potency, but typically it's not going to be super powerful, but it still can be helpful if you have no other options. Army of the Dead is another damage mitigation ability if you're taking too much damage. Anti-magic shell is pretty straightforward. You're going to be absorbing 75% of spell damage. It can be very, very helpful for dragon fights or any fights with lots of spell damage. It can only absorb up to 50% of the Death Knight's health. But very, very powerful, but it only lasts 5 seconds. Vampiric Blood is one of the most powerful, probably about equal with Icebound Fortitude in terms of strength. This is basically almost like Last Stand. You get 15% of your maximum health, and then it also increases the amount of health generated through spells and effects by 35% for 10 seconds. After the effect expires, you lose the health, right? Just like Last Stand. The reason this is really powerful is because it's also going to increase the amount of healing you get. It's going to increase the amount of health you get from your own self-heals. So combine this with other self-heals like your Death Strike, your Rune Tap, or even when you sacrifice your Ghoul, Death Pact. Vampiric Blood is very, very powerful cooldown. Unbreakable Armor is only going to be for Frost, but it reinforces your armor with a thick coat of ice, increasing armor by 25% and strength by 20%. This is very potent for high physical damage fights, so it can be very helpful to use this when you're up against a boss that you know does a lot of physical damage. Blood Tap. Baseline does not do anything, but if you have 4 out of the 5 tier 10 set pieces, the bonus grants 12% damage reduction for 10 seconds to your Blood Tap. So it could be absolutely worth it to go get at least 4 out of 5 of tier 10 in order for that set bonus to equip yourself with another defensive cooldown. Rune Tap in the Blood Tree can convert 1 blood rune into, depending on if you get improved Rune Tap, 10, 13, 16, or 20% of your maximum health at max rank, and also depending on what rank of improved Rune Tap you have, it will also reduce the cooldown up to a maximum of 30 seconds. So could be a pretty potent cooldown depending if you get that improved Rune Tap, and it's a nice defensive cooldown to help self-heal. Again, best paired with Vampiric Blood. When it comes to trinkets, they're absolutely defensive cooldowns. Citrina's Impeding Scarab is very similar to Vampiric Blood, increasing your maximum health for 15 seconds. And then Sindragosa's Flawless Fang to help increase your resistances for 10 seconds during those high spell damage fights. So this is just an example. Your trinkets might vary, but these are some of the defensive cooldowns you have available as a as a Death Knight tank. All right, let's go through the Blood Death Knight tank Phase 1 pre-raid best in slot gear. Starting with the helm, we have the Tempered Titan Steel helm. This is an excellent helm created from blacksmithing. You can learn the recipe from your trainer once you get 440. And this is going to get the Austered Earth Siege Diamond Metagem and a solid blue sapphire for plus 24 stamina. Very good for Death Knight tank stamina. Excellent stat. Makes your percent health back from abilities go up, which is very nice. Alternatively, you could get the Titan Forged Plate Helm of Triumph for 40 Wintergrasp Marks of Honor. So that's somewhat accessible. If you're an engineer, the Armored Titanium Goggles will be an excellent choice for you. I know many min-maxers will be engineering, so this will be an excellent helm for you to get. You can learn the recipe at your trainer. Alternatively, if you're not if you're not a engineer, if you're not a blacksmith, if you don't want to farm Wintergrasp Marks of Honor, you could also go to Heroic Gundrak and get the Ground Tremor Totem. The Ground Tremor Helm, 25% drop chance off Marabi and Heroic Gundrak. When it comes to your neck piece, the Chained Military Gorget will be the top pick for 25 emblems of heroism. Alternatively, if you're a jewel crafter, you can get the BOP pattern for the Titanium Earthguard Chain. This is an excellent neck piece as well. It's also BOE, so if you're not a jewel crafter, you could purchase it on the auction house. And another option is also the Shadow Seeker's Pendant, which drops off Jadoga Shadow Seer in Heroic Ankahet Old Kingdom. So you've got a couple different options for your neck piece. When it comes to your shoulder, Pauldrons of the Colossus. This drops off Drakari Colossus in Heroic Gundrak. It's a really easy dungeon, so it shouldn't be too hard to get. Also, it's important to mention the best shoulder enchant's actually Greater Inscription of the Gladiator for 30 stamina and 15 resilience. And then for the helm enchant is Arcanum of the Stalwart Protector, which requires Revered with the Argent Crusade for that 37 stamina and 20 defense rating. Now, when it comes to your cloak, Cloak of the Enemy is best in slot. This drops off Commander Stoutbeard in Heroic Nexus, and then the enchant will be Enchant Cloak Mighty Armor. Some alternatives, even though this shouldn't be too hard, you could also purchase the Cloak of Peaceful Resolutions from the Wormrest Accord. Once you're honored, you could make the Frostguard Drape or buy it. It's BOE. If you're a tailor, the Tattered Castle Drape from Heroic Utgard Keep is actually a trash drop, BOE again. A lot of BOE options. You could just purchase a good pre-raid best in slot item. Now, when it comes to chest piece, of course, your tier piece will be the best, and you're going to want to enchant that with super health. That's going to be 275 extra health. Alternatively, Wormrest Accord Revered will allow you to purchase the breastplate of the Solemn Council, which will be very nice. Alternatively, there's actually a quest reward, Junk in My Trunk, for the silver-plated battle chest. So this is probably your easiest option. If you're looking for some pre-raid best in slot, go for this and complete that quest. That's my my suggestion. When it comes to your wrist, you can get the bracers of the Herald from Old Kingdom, Ankahet Heroic from Herald Village. This is actually not too difficult at all to get, and this is very nice epic wrist. Enchant that with Enchant Bracer Major Stamina. Now, of course, tier set again will be the best for hands, but alternatively, you could just purchase the Daunting Handguards or craft them if you're a blacksmith. Violet Hold Heroic also drops the Gauntlets of the Water Revenant, which are very nice. Icaron, 33% chance. Now, remember, Violet Hold has a different boss each time, so this might be a little bit hard to get. Exalted with Kirin Tor gives Fire-Proven Gauntlets, another option. Heroic Gundrak might be your best option, though. Galdara drops the Horn-Tipped Gauntlets, pretty good drop chance there. And you could also just purchase the Refined Ore Gloves, or if you find them in the Heroic Halls of Stones trash drop. So gloves might be a little bit harder to fill, but I imagine Gauntlets of the Water or Horn-Tipped Gauntlets are probably going to be your best bet, and if you can't get those, Refined Ore Gauntlets should be your next best option. Now, when it comes to your waist guard of the Living Iron for 40 Emblems of Heroism is BiS. Alternatively, you could get the Ancient Aligned Girdle from Heroic Anubarak in Ajal Narub. That's going to be very nice. You can also purchase the Savage Saronite waistguard or craft it if you are a blacksmith. Those should be a couple good options for you. When it comes to your legs, the bolstered leg plates from Cyanagosa in Heroic Violet Hold is your best in slot. Put a Regal Twilight Opal in there, 8 dodge rating, 12 stamina, and Frosthide leg armor is your best in slot leg enhancement, which will give you 55 stamina and 22 agility. Going to be super expensive to get this, but it is your best in slot. When it comes to your feet, Sabatons of Draconic Vigor, if you get Revered with Wormrest Accord. Alternatively, 15 Wintergrass Marks of Honor gets the Titan Forge Greaves of Triumph. You could also purchase the BOE Epic Tempered Titan Steel Treads, or even worst, you have the Greaves of Ancient Evil, but it will be easier to get from Ankahet, Old Kingdom Heroic, Herald Village. So those are a couple options for feet. When it comes to your ring, the Keystone Great Ring is fantastic. Drops off the Prophet Theron Ja in Heroic Drak Theron Keep. That shouldn't be too hard to get. Titanium Earthguard Ring is a BOE epic you can purchase or craft if you're a jewel crafter. Band of Torture could be an alternative. Drops off Dracos the Interrogator in Heroic Oculus. That should not be too hard to get either. When it comes to trinkets, Essence of Gossamer, when struck in combat, has a chance to shield you in a protective barrier, which will reduce damage from each attack by 140. Last 10 seconds, has a whopping 111 stamina. Very, very good. Drops off Hadronox in Azal Narub. Definitely you should go for that. When it comes to your second trinket, Seal of the Pantheon, this has an on-use effect to increase armor by 3,570 for 20 seconds on a 2-minute cooldown, and also increases your defense rating by 65. As you know, getting defense rating capped is very important. This has a 13% drop chance off Loken in the Halls of Lightning. When it comes to your weapon, the BOE Epic Titan Steel Destroyer is best in slot for your Blood Death Knight tank. If you're a blacksmith, you can create it, or you can purchase it probably for a hefty amount of gold. There are some alternatives. You could go with the Saliva Corroded Pike. This has a 33% chance to drop in Heroic Violet Hold. This is probably going to be your budget option, and I recommend you going for that if you don't feel like putting together the Titan Steel Destroyer. There is also the Colossal Skullclad Cleaver if you want to get that off Loken in Heroic Halls of Lightning as well. So that's also definitely another option. There are some other options as well, but it's kind of in descending order of power. And then you're going to want to put the Rune of the Stone Skin Gargoyle enchantment, right? This is a weapon enchant for Death Knight only. It's going to give you 25 defense and 2% increased total stamina. Very, very good. When it comes to your relic, you're going to want the Sigil of the Frozen Conscience. This increases damage dealt by your Icy Touch ability by 111. The reason you want this is because Icy Touch is the highest single target threat generation ability in all of Wrath of the Lich King, and so increasing that damage dealt is just going to be fantastic. It's going to help you, keep threat. It's going to be great. 30 Venture Coins for that. Alternatively, you could get the Sigil of the Unfaltering Knight. Your Icy Touch will also increase your defense rating by 53. That's very nice for only 15 emblems of heroism. More of a defensive sigil instead of a sort of threat generation one. And those are your pre-raid best in slot options for Blood Death Knight tank. All right, next up, we're going to talk about the pre-raid best in slot gear for a Frost Death Knight DPS. If you want to be a Frost Death Knight tank, just follow the Blood Death Knight tank best in slot list that I have also listed. So this is for Frost Death Knight DPS, which is quite good in Wrath of the Lich King. So starting with the helm, you can get the best in slot spiked Titan Steel Helm, which is a BoE epic. If you're a blacksmith, you can create it or you can purchase it. It will probably cost a lot. If you don't want to go with this option, engineering is also best in slot. Charged titanium specs. If you're not a blacksmith or an engineer and you don't have the money, you can also get the Titan Forged Plate Helm of Triumph for 40 Wintergrass Marks of Honor. If you don't have the time to grind that, you could also buy the Helm of Command. It'll probably be much cheaper than the BoE Epics. This is a BoE Blue. And if you really have zero money, you could also just do Ajal Nerub. Anubarak drops the Chitin Shell Great Helm, which also is an option. Now, when it comes to your meta gem, you're going to want to use the Relentless Earth Siege Diamond. This gives you 21 agility and 3% increased critical damage. The Enchanted Tier fits all slots and will give you +6 to all stats, and usually this is taking the spot of a blue socket. When it comes to your best in slot helm enchant, you want to use the Arcanum of Torment, which requires Knights of the Ebon Blade Revered, and then you can purchase it. It's going to permanently grant you 50 attack power and 20 critical strike rating to your helm. Now moving on to the neck piece, we have the Titanium Impact Choker. This is crafted by Jewel Crafters and it's a BoE epic, so you could also purchase it. It's going to be very pricey, however. So a backup option could be the Gold Amulet of Kings, which drops off King Ymiran on Heroic Utgard Pinnacle. Very good drop chance, so that's a great alternative. Now when it comes to your Shoulders of the Giant Lords is a great option because you can get this from farming Reputation. All you need is Sons of Hodir Revered and you can get it. And it's good because you're going to be farming Sons of Hodir Reputation anyways, because Greater Inscription of the Axe requires Exalted with the Sons of Hodir, and this is the best in slot shoulder enchantment, giving 40 attack power and 15 critical strike rating. However, if you are not min-maxing, you could also go get the Snake Den Spalders from Sladran in Heroic Gundrak as an alternative. Now, when it comes to your back, Heroic Gundrak once again drops a BoE Blue item actually from Trash that is best in slot, the Cloak of Bloodied Water, and you'll want to enchant that with Greater Speed, which gives 23 haste rating. Now, if you don't have the money or you don't get it to drop, there are some other options. If you don't have the money, then you're not going to be able to afford the Ice Striker's Cloak, which is a BoE that is crafted from leatherworking. So you could also go for the Shroud of Reverberation, which drops in Halls of Lightning Heroic off of Vulcan. And that is a pretty good drop chance. Now, when it comes to your chest, obviously the tier piece is the best, and you should fill that with +16 Strength Bold Scarlet Rubies and enchant that with Powerful Stats, which gives you 10 to all stats. However, if you are not getting that tier piece yet, then you should go to Draktheron, keep Heroic, and fight Novos the Summoner for the Breastplate of Undeath, which is your next best in slot item. Good drop chance there. You should be able to get that. When it comes to your wrist, best in slot will be actually a BoE Blue. This will be super expensive once again. Blacksmiths can create this for some gold. Make sure to enchant your bracer with Greater Assault. Now, if you're not a blacksmith and you don't have the gold, Bands of the Stoneforge is a great option. Drops off of Halls of Stone Heroic Sojourner the Iron Shaper. That should be possible to get for you instead. Now, when it comes to your hands, tier piece, of course, will be best. Enchant that with the Crusher enchant, granting 44 attack power. Alternatively, the Gauntlets of Dragon Wrath are very, very good, and you can get this from Heroic Oculus, Lay Guarding Aragos. Very good drop chance, and that shouldn't be too hard to get. Now, when it comes to your waist, you could definitely get Jirach's Crocolisk skin for 40 emblems of heroism. Put a Bold Scarlet Ruby in that. If you don't have the 40 emblem of heroism, you could also get the Flame Bathed Steel Girdle, which drops off Carriestraza in Heroic Nexus. Moving on to legs, you could get the Staggering Leg Plates, which is the best in-slot possible leg for you, pre-raid BiS. It has a red socket and yellow socket. Just put 2 precise Scarlet Rubies in there to get plus 16 expertise rating in each. Again, the enchantment is the Ice Scale Leg Armor, which will give you 75 attack power and critical strike rating by 22. It's going to be very expensive, I'm sure. Drops off of Ingvar the Plunderer in Heroic Utgard Keep. Shouldn't have too much trouble getting that at all. Now, when it comes to feet, the Obliterator Greaves are best in slot. Very nice. Your attacks ignore 43 of your opponent's armor. Always very good in Wrath of the Lich King. Enchant that with Ice Walker for 12 critical strike and hit rating. Throw an expertise rating, precise Scarlet Ruby in there. 33% drop chance off Zuramat the Obliterator in Heroic Violet Hold. Might be a little bit difficult to get. Again, Violet Hold, bosses rotate. You could also get Death Inured Sabatons dropping or being purchased from Knights of the Ebon Blade Exalted. Spike Titan Steel Treads you can buy, BOE Epic, or create it if you're a blacksmith. Heroic Utgard Pinnacle probably could be the easiest to get, the Echoing Stompers off of Savala Sorrow Grave. So you got a couple options there for your feet. When it comes to your finger, Ring of the Kirin Tor's BiS, if you're made out of gold, 8,500 gold for you. Alternatively, Hemorrhaging Circle off of Heroic Gundrak from Galdara is another option. Titanium Impact Band, going to cost you gold most likely. Jewel Crafters make it. Ring of Scarlet Shadows is another option. Probably won't cost as much, but you could purchase this, the BOE Blue. So you got a couple options there. You're going to need 2 rings, so you could also try to get Band of Frosted Thorns from Heroic Nexus or Marak the Tree Shaper. Couple options there. When it comes to your trinket, best in slot will be Dark Moon Card Greatness. When you heal or deal damage, you have a chance to gain Greatness, increasing your strength, agility, intellect, or spirit by 300 for 15 seconds. Your highest stat is always chosen. So for your Death Knight, it'll be strength. You have to get the Nobles deck. Of course, not everyone's going to be able to get this, so you could also get the Mirror of Truth for 40 emblems of heroism. That will do very nice. Chance on melee and ranged critical strike to increase your attack power by 1,000. Very good. Also, the Sphere of Red Dragon's Blood drops off of Carriestraza in Heroic Nexus, and that shouldn't be too hard to get. So you have a couple different options here. For trinkets, when it comes to your weapon, best in slot is the Titan Steel Bone Crusher, which is actually a blacksmith only BOP craftable 2-handed mace. Sorry, that's a one-handed, it's a main hand. You could also use the Kroll Cleaver, not to be mistaken with Kroll Blade, but this is actually gotten from pickpocketing reinforced junk boxes, believe it or not. So that is very, very cool, and kind of a cool reminder of the old Kroll Blade. I remember I got mine back in Eastern Plaguelands back in the day. Could also get the Reaper of Dark Souls. This is the Knights of the Ebon Blade revered reputation requirement. Alternatively, Cryptlord's Death Blade off of Heroic Ajal Narub Anubarak drops this, so that is also another option. So this is basically dual wielding Frost Death Knight DPS. You're going to want to put Rune of Razor Ice on your main hand, and you're going to want to put Rune of the Fallen Crusader on your offhand. And basically any of the swords I went through in the first time could be also used. Infantry Assault Blade off of Heroic Prince Keliseth and Utgard Keep. The Key from Levantthorn, Heroic Violet Hold. Lots of different options here. And then when it comes to your Sigil, Sigil of Haunted Dreams is best in slot. Your Blood Strike and Heart Strikes have a chance to grant 173 critical strike rating for 10 seconds. If you can't get that for 15 Emblems of Heroism, which I really think you'd be able to, it's only 15, the Sigil of Frozen Conscious is also another option, increasing damage dealt by Icy Touch by 111. And this is your Frost Death Knight pre-raid best in slot gear list. All right, next up, we're going to be talking about the Unholy Death Knight pre-raid best in slot gear. Now, it's very, very similar to the Frost Death Knight pre-raid best in slot gear with only a few different changes. So for your helm, best in slot is the Spike Titan Steel Helm. This is a BOE epic crafted by blacksmiths. When it comes to your meta gem, you're going to want the Thundering Sky Flare Diamond. Has a chance to increase melee and ranged attack speed. And then for the blue socket, you're going to want to put an enchanted tier, which gives +6 to all stats. You can only have one in your equipment total. It's unique equipped. When it comes to your helm enchant, you want the Arcanum of Torment, which permanently adds 50 attack power and 20 critical strike rating to a head slot item. You're going to have to be revered with the Knights of the Ebon Blade in order to purchase this. When it comes to your neck piece, the Titanium Impact Choker is best in slot. This is a BOE epic crafted by Jewel Crafters. Again, there are alternatives, but this is the best in slot, and you're going to want to put a bold Scarlet Ruby into that for that +16 strength. When it comes to your shoulder, you can get the Snake Den Spalders from Sladran in Heroic Gundrak. This is best in slot, and you're going to want to put the Greater Inscription of the Axe on it. You have to be exalted with the Sons of Hodir in order to purchase this enchantment, which grants 40 attack power and 15 critical strike rating. When it comes to the gem, you're going to want to use the Bold Scarlet Ruby, which grants +15 strength. When it comes to your cloak, you're going to want to use the Cloak of Bloodied Waters. This is a BOE blue that probably you won't see drop, but maybe you will, so auction house or farm lots of Heroic Gundrak. It is a trash drop, and you're going to want to enchant that with greater speed, which grants 23 haste rating. When it comes to your tier piece, of course, or your chest piece, you want the tier set Heroes Scourgeborn Battle Plate. Of course, if you can't get that yet, Engraved Chestplate of Ek will definitely be your next best option, dropping from Ek the Ferocious in Heroic Gundrak. As you can see, a lot of stuff for Unholy Death Knight best in slot drops from Heroic Gundrak. You're going to be farming that quite a bit. When it comes to your wrist, best in slot's BOE blue from blacksmithing called Vengeance Bindings. Probably going to be expensive. Enchant that with Enchant Brace or Greater Assault for 50 attack power. Alternatively, Heroic Halls of Stone from Sejonir, the Iron Shaper, will give you Bands of the Stone Forge. So that's also probably an easier option, a cheaper option. For hands, you're going to want your tier piece, Heroes Scourgeborn Gauntlets. Alternatively, Heroic Oculus Lay Guardian Aragos drops the Gauntlets of Dragon Wrath, and that could be definitely just as good. Verdungo's Barbarian Cord for your waist can be acquired for 40 emblems of heroism. You're going to want to socket that with an Etched Monarch Topaz. Alternatively, the Heroic Nexus Carry Straza drops Flame Bathed Steel Girdle. That's the last boss. Nice drop chance, so you could also go for that alternatively. Now for your legs, best in slot will be Staggering Leg Plates, dropping off Ingvar the Plunderer in Heroic Utgard Keep. Socket that with 2 Bold Scarlet Rubies, and enchant that with the Ice Scale Leg Armor, which is your best in slot. Of course, it'll be very expensive to get that, I'm sure. The Obliterator Greaves is your best in slot for your feet, and this drops off of Zuramat the Obliterator in a Heroic Violet Hold. Make sure to enchant that with Ice Walker, which increases critical strike and hit rating by 12, and socket that with a Bold Scarlet Ruby for +16 strength. Next, Ring of the Kirin Tor, of course, will be your pre-raid best in slot for 8,500 gold. That's just quite a lot, so if you don't want to get that, you could also try to get the Ring of Scarlet Shadows, which you can purchase or create if you're a Jewel Crafter. Alternatively, the Titanium Impact Band if you're a Jewel Crafter, or if you have money, you can also buy this as well. There's also a non-purchase option, Band of Frosted Thorns, probably your best bet if you don't have gold or professions. You can get this from Ormarok the Tree Shaper in Heroic Nexus. Now when it comes to your trinkets, Meteorite Whetstone is your pre-raid best in slot, dropping off King Yamiron in Heroic Utgard Pinnacle. Your melee and ranged attacks have a chance to increase your haste rating by 400 for 10 seconds. Very good. Alternatively, you could also go for some other trinkets. Dark Moon Card Greatness will be your other trinket best in slot. Of course, Noble's Deck will be very hard to get, I'm sure, and very expensive. You could go for Mirror of Truth if you have 40 emblems of heroism, but also the Sphere of Red Dragon's Blood drops from Heroic Nexus Kara Straza, and you're going to be going for her for some other gear, so Sphere of the Red Dragon's Blood is probably going to be your other trinket. Now when it comes to weapons, Titan Steel Bone Crusher is your best in slot. Put Rune of the Fallen Crusader on that. If you can't afford it, can't make it, if you're not a blacksmith, the Reaper of Dark Souls will be very good as well, dropping or being purchased from Knights of the Ebon Blade Revered, or alternatively Crypt Lord's Death Blade from Heroic Ajal Narub Anubarak. For your offhand, Grass Cutter is your other best in slot item. This can be purchased for 50 emblems of heroism, increases attack power by 76, good crit rating, very nice offhand sword. And there are a number of other offhand swords. Krull Cleaver, probably very unlikely to get it, but it is an alternative. More likely to get Red Sword of Courage from Heroic Card Pinnacle off of King Yamiron. Now when it comes to your sigil, best in slot is the Sigil of the Wild Buck. This increases damage dealt by your Death Coil ability by 80. Very nice, will require 30 venture coins. Alternatively, your next best option is the Sigil of Haunted Dreams, causing your Blood Strike and Heart Strikes to have a chance to grant 173 critical strike rating for 10 seconds. And this is your Unholy Death Knight pre-raid best in slot list. All right, next up, we're going to look at some tier sets. Always an important thing when deciding what class to play. So here we're looking at tier 7, the 10-man and 25-man versions. When you're first going into Wrath of the Lich King, this will be your first tier set. So take a look and see if you like how your Death Knight will look in full tier 7. I think it looks pretty cool myself. Moving on to tier 8. This is what it will look like. This is actually my personal favorite out of all of the Death Knight tier sets in Wrath of the Lich King. I think tier 8 looks the coolest. Very, very awesome looking PvE set. Tier 9 looks very cool. Depending on if you're Horde or Alliance, you're going to have two different looking tier sets. Personally, this is actually also the same for Paladins. It's just a recoloring. But they look pretty decent. I think it looks all right. Moving on to tier 10, I actually think Death Knights look very, very cool as well. This is probably my second pick for coolest looking tier sets. Definitely the Sanctified Scourgelord battle gear looks very, very cool. All right, moving on to PvP sets. This is the Savage, Hateful, and Deadly Gladiator, aka Season 5 different sets. Not my personal favorite, but they look okay. Moving on to Season 6, you can see this looks very similar, but slightly different. And then this is Season 7, again, very similar. And then here is I'm probably messing this up. This is Season 7, I believe. This one actually I think looks pretty cool out of most of them. And then finally, Season 8, the final season, probably the coolest one out of all of them. But that is the different season sets. I think these, yes, so Season 5 again, Season 6, Season 7, Season 8. There you go. Got it. So the sets look pretty cool. I think the PvP ones look cool near the end. The PvE ones have a few that look cool. But those are the sets and what they'll look like for Death Knight and Wrath of the Lich King. Wow, what a guide. Almost 2 hours long. If you like this one, I also did another one on Shaman. Click the video above my head to check out the Shaman class deep dive. I bet you'll love it. I'll see you there.